Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. Linda Salant is a 5-year carnivore, mother of 2, competitive ballroom dancer, and a certified MeatRx Carnivore Coach. She's at The Carnitarian on Instagram, and Linda has used a zero-carb diet to reverse a wide array of health problems, including amenorrhea and PCOS, anxiety, migraines, edema, and whole body pain. She's also a regenerating member of the Savory Institute, me too, and feels passionately about how ruminant animals and regenerative ranching are a net positive for both our health and for the health of our planet. Welcome to the show, Linda.
Hi, Scott. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Of course. And congratulations on 5 years today. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I know it's really exciting for me to be, a carnivore for 5 years. I'm super excited to spend some time with you today. It's a great way to celebrate.
That's awesome. So let's rewind the clock. What was your health and diet like before carnivore?
Interestingly enough, before carnivore, I considered myself to be generally pretty healthy. And it wasn't like I was in a situation where a lot of people find themselves like at the end of their rope and they're searching for something that can help them and then they stumble upon carnivore. I was sort of generally, I thought, very healthy. But there were a few things, actually, thinking about it now, there's like this laundry list of things that needed improvement that I didn't realize needed improvement. I had done, random dieting things in the past and standard American diet. I'd done some calories in, calories out stuff and, just trying to keep my weight, stable. And after I had my son, which was 7 years ago, 7 years ago, I decided that I would try, keto again. I had done keto in the past. I had done low carb for a very long time. Before that. And, I always felt best with that sort of approach. So after my son, I said, all right, enough's enough. I'm going to lose these last 15 pounds. I'm going to go keto and see if I can get, the extra off. And just a few months into that, I found a carnivore. And then I started to realize all of the health issues that I actually had. So my health wasn't as great as I thought it was before I found carnivore. It was, like I said, my diet was generally low carb, but it wasn't great. And my health really wasn't great. I had, some major issues, we can discuss.
Yeah, let's get into some of that. But before we do, let's start. How did you find carnivore in 2015? There wasn't a lot of information out there back then.
Right. So there really wasn't. There were a few Facebook groups, and that is how I found a zero carb carnivore. In my searches for keto back then, the stories of Charlene Anderson and Kelly Hogan popped up in my Facebook feed. Just because there was like a diet story that's just popping up in my Facebook feed at the time. And so there they were. And so I read about it and I went online and I found, read their stories and I was just blown away. I thought it was really strange, but I thought, wow, that's like really interesting. And it's so healing. They both, got such huge improvements from switching to a zero carb diet. They both look amazing. So I said, well, I should try this. I'm already keto. The only things that I really had to take out were like artificial sweeteners, nuts and vegetables, right? I was already pretty meat heavy. So since even though there wasn't a lot of information out there, there was enough for me to sort of be convinced to try it. And there were a lot of people in this very popular Facebook group with these fantastic stories of healing and great health, longevity. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. We'll see. Can't hurt, obviously can't hurt. So I said to my husband, I'm just going to give this like a month because they say just do 30 days and then you won't want to go back. And so I said, okay, yeah, right. We'll see. And I did 30 days and now it's 5 years.
Wow.
It's crazy.
And
Yeah,
that was the
crazy.
Zeroing In on Health Facebook group?
That was, yes. So that was the first group that I found. And that is where I read those stories. So there was an offshoot of that group. There is an offshoot of that group where I was more active for quite some time before I found Instagram. So I wasn't very active in the Zeroing In on Health, but there are a ton of really great people in that group spreading some really great information. And then there are some other Facebook groups that I love. That, there's some great people in there. Just so much information, so many really smart conversations going on where people are being, they're sort of inquisitive as to the science of zero carb, the validity of it, the social aspects of it, the sustainability of it. Any question you have about carnivore can be answered, by the very generous people in those groups. So, it's a great source of information. And I found that the groups to be very reassuring when there wasn't a lot of information out there and you would say, well, what about this? You just think like, really, am I really going to be okay without fiber? And you could go there and, talk to dozens of people that say, yeah, you are. You're going to be totally okay without fiber. So it's very reassuring to have that kind of a support system. So I felt very lucky that was out there.
Yeah, those groups are fantastic. And when I say there wasn't a lot of information out there, I don't mean to discredit them at all. I think there's fantastic information there. I just meant more. It wasn't as in your face in all the podcasts and in the mainstream as it is now. Yeah. But there's always been this kind of private community of very knowledgeable and helpful, experienced carnivores there.
Absolutely. And I mean, I am blown away with now how it has exploded. Into, I'd like to say mainstream. I'm not sure. I feel like it's mainstream, but, maybe just because I'm living in it, I'm exposed to it and all of the carnivore community every day. But I feel like there are some seriously popular people that are talking about carnivore now, influencing people to try it. And, so many people in that World Carnivore Tribe group and with everything that's going on with MeatRx and all of the members there, it's just really exploded in the last year or so.
Yeah, it has taken off, and it's wonderful to see. So talking about when you first found it, that 30 days or maybe even the first few months, if you can remember, what were they like? What did you experience and how were you dipping your toes into carnivore?
So in the beginning, I didn't have this transition issue that a lot of people have going from standard American diet to a carnivore diet where they're dealing with sugar withdrawals and they're dealing with like electrolyte imbalances that come from eating this, standard American kind of garbagey diet that we're all accustomed to. So since I was coming from a keto place, my adaptation into carnivore was pretty easy. I fat adapted pretty easily. And I found myself pretty quickly feeling really good. In those first few weeks, I realized like I wasn't getting headaches anymore. My migraines had gone away. And I was like, that's new because they were, daily. And I had improvement in energy. I had improvement in anxiety. Right away, I felt better. Like the panic attacks that I was having pretty frequently just didn't happen. And so I said, you know what? I think I'm just going to stick with this as long as I can. Because it seemed so easy. The simplicity of it was so easy and I felt great. There is that, they talk about the zero carb zen, and that is like such a real thing. You get this mellow and you're able to, not only focus better, but sort of put life back in perspective. And I don't know if that for me was a function of, not being in pain and not being depressed and anxious, or if it is, some more kind of mellow enhancement. But I just felt like, a sort of a rosier view to life. Things just were so improved. And I said, well, there's just no way I'm going back. This is just so much better. It's not worth having, nachos. This is way better than nachos.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Because like you said, you didn't know that you thought you were in pretty good health, before starting,
Yeah,
right?
I did. I mean, I was generally pretty active. I was dancing at the time, but I was just having some issues, that I kind of just assumed were just part of getting older. And I didn't consider myself a sick person. I wasn't at the doctor's office. I wasn't on prescription medications, stuff like that. But I was taking Excedrin like every day, and I very rarely got my period. And I had, chronic venous insufficiency, which causes edema and swelling and painful legs. And, I was wearing compression to help with that pain. And, I had things like gas, like bloating, like just the day-to-day things that everyone deals with when they're eating kind of a crappy diet, that you say, whatever, it's not that bad. You're having some pain, take an aspirin, like take a Tylenol, take it every day. It doesn't matter. So it's that kind of stuff where we accept that it's okay to kind of be in average health, because if you're not sick, if you're not on prescription medications and in the hospital and going to doctors, people consider you in pretty good health. And so that's where I sort of considered myself. But the truth was, I really wasn't in great health. I had PCOS and insulin resistance, and I was tired all the time and anxious and depressed. So all of those things were so greatly improved with switching to a carnivore diet. And it's really shocking, was to me to realize that I'd been living with all of those things and I didn't have to be. I thought that those things were just sort of, that's the way it was. I'm going to have to deal with it. Some of those things run in my family. And I was just going to have to get on with life and, take a Tylenol and get on with life.
Yeah. It's amazing how you can create this new normal for yourself, with the diet. It really opens your eyes, and you didn't know how you felt before until after. And how has carnivore diet evolved for you, Linda? Like how is it different than when you first started out in 2015? What have you learned? What have you tweaked over time?
So when I started, I was just kind of eating all the time because, what they say is just like, eat the meat, eat when you're hungry. Drink water, eat meat. Don't worry about quantities, eat as much as you want. Because you will eventually just not want so much. And it'll work its way out. And that is sort of true. And I do recommend that to people still in the beginning. When you're starting out, eat meat kind of as much as will make you full. Don't stuff your face, past satiety, but eat as often as you need to. If you're feeling hungry, eat some meat, eat whatever kind of meat you like anytime you're feeling hungry. And don't try to get complicated with it, right? So in the beginning, it was for me a lot of meat that I liked, which was like a lot of pepperoni and a lot of salami. And because it's all animal foods, and I didn't just do meat and water, I was eating a lot of cheese. So that has drastically changed for me. Over the years, I rarely now eat dairy. I have cut down tremendously. I rarely eat salami and pepperoni and those kinds of meats. And I stick with just fresh, whole cuts of meat. And, I'm not doing a lot of eggs anymore. So it's really changed to more of just like a beef, pork, chicken and fish and water, coffee kind of diet. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit more simple and a little less dirty, I would say, than it used to be. It was more kind of like a free for all.
Streamlined.
As far as yes, it is more refined. And then my eating times have shifted where I've now gotten to a point where I know how much food to eat to keep me full for a nice long time. And I won't anymore sit down to just a single burger or a single small 6-ounce steak, because that will, make me want to have another meal again. And then it's, breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner. And so I just don't do that anymore. When I sit down to eat, I can eat like a pound of meat. And then later on in the day, a pound and a quarter. Later on in the day, I'll have another, half a pound of meat or so for a second meal. And that's it. And I'm done. And so I do now just 1 or 2 meals a day. So I've incorporated intermittent fasting basically into my daily schedule. And I've also added in extended fasting. I've done some really nice long fasts, which I find to be really therapeutic. And, it's really been fantastic for the lipedema and swelling issue and issues that I've got regarding that. So that's, definitely something that I wouldn't recommend people do at the very start either. So I learned that, it's great to incorporate fasting, but like to not try to jump into everything all at once.
Right. That's super interesting. And just going to ask a bunch of questions about the details because I'm super curious and I know listeners will be too. And it's rare you get to talk to someone who's tried it all and done it all and been doing this for 5 years. So you said beef, pork, chicken, and fish. Do you focus on one or the others? Do you have a difference in how you feel when you have different types of animals? How does that work?
Yeah. So I definitely focus on beef. Absolutely. If I don't have beef, I don't feel like I've really eaten that day. So beef is an everyday thing. Second to that would be, it's hard to say. So lamb would sort of be like my next favorite thing other than beef, but I find it very difficult to get lamb that's not shipped in from overseas. So I very rarely get lamb. So I focus on beef. And so then that's my most consumed food. After that would be pork, and I stick to pork belly just because it is so delicious and satisfying. I very rarely will eat chicken. And when I eat fish, which is also pretty rare, I'll have, like shrimp or lobster, and it's typically as a side to my beef. So if the fish is kind of a side dish, or if I haven't, if my steak wasn't big enough for lunch or dinner, I'll add some tuna or like some, like smoked fish, some tinned fish. I'll add that at the end of the day and, just as an add-on, but I don't generally do large fish meals. I find that beef is the most satisfying. And what I typically will do is like make sure that all of the fat that comes on the steak stays on the steak. And then I eat that too. And I find that to be, the most satisfying way of eating is, beef heavy and sort of a 50-50 fat to protein, visual. And that will give you like an 80% fat by calorie kind of a macro. But
interesting.
But I will not track. I am not a fan of tracking or weighing.
Right.
So I can sort of like just look at my package and say, okay, this is, about 3/4 pound of steak and it looks pretty fatty. So I'm going to just stick with that. But if I'm looking at the steak and I see that it's really not fatty, I'm like, all right, I'm going to throw on some butter or I'm going to add some suet because I'm feeling like if I just eat this lean steak, I'm not going to get full. And so I have over the years figured out what the plate should kind of look like. And I don't have to track macros at all, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Isn't that wonderful?
It's amazing.
And I bet it took a long time to arrive at that too.
It does. It really does take a while to get there. And so, I tell people when I'm talking to them about, like tips on doing carnivore, I say, don't track. You don't need to track. But if I ask you, like, how much do you think you're eating? And you really can't tell me, I'm eating, I want you to start paying attention to weights, like really start paying attention because there is this sort of, this sort of magic spot for people, which is somewhere, depending on your weight, it's somewhere around like 2 pounds, 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds of meat for ladies, where they feel their best. and a lot of women undereat. And so I only recommend people start thinking about quantities in terms of if I suspect that they're maybe under eating. But other than that, just eat to satiety and no tracking macros anymore. It's great.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I always say, like, you kind of have, unless you're like living in the kitchen and you can prepare the exact amount of food at the snap of your fingers that you want, you do kind of have to plan out how much you're going to eat for a day. You don't have to track it to the 10 calorie mark.
Exactly.
But you're going to have to say, like, I think I'm going to eat 2 pounds today, or I think I'm going to eat 2.5. And you're going to have to defrost some meat or,
Yes.
pick up some meat. So you may as well have a rough sense of what you're getting.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with you. It's like, I feel so bad for these people that, like, on a Sunday, they'll go into their macro calculator and they have to plan out their whole week, to the calorie, to the macro of like, well, wait a minute, I don't have enough grams of fat. Like, what should I add a pat of butter to, or a scoop of coconut oil to, or something to, that would drive me nuts. I couldn't do that. I lived with I forget what the name of it is, MyFitnessPal. I did that for two months when I was doing keto, because keto sort of requires you to track macros. And it drove me crazy having to think about every gram of protein and trying to make that pie chart look the way you want it to look.
It can be maddening. And how about organs and supplements, Linda? Do you incorporate any of those?
I do. So, I do love liver. I eat calf liver. I eat chicken liver. And I'll prepare part, oxtail, like sort of the offcuts as well. But I would say that I average like once a week on that. I'll just do sort of a interesting cut where I get a hankering for something that's different, or, I'll make a pate, or I'll, buy a beef heart or something just because to switch it up. So I do incorporate organs. I don't feel like they're completely necessary, but liver is the most amazing superfood. I mean, if you enjoy liver, and it was something that I grew up with, so I feel pretty lucky that I got that into my sort of palate repertoire as a kid. That if you enjoy liver, it is just so good for you. So I recommend that if you like it, eat it. It's great for you. As far as supplements, I don't do much. I put salt, like regular salt, like Redmond salt or Maldon salt or something like that, on my steaks, on, the meats. And then I will use a potassium salt, like a salt substitute. Morton salt substitute is the one that I use to get potassium. And then I will sometimes use a liquid magnesium. If I'm feeling like I can't sleep, or if I get leg cramps, stuff like that, I'm feeling like maybe I'm a little low on magnesium, but that's it. There's nothing else. I mean, I think one of the reasons that, carnivore is not so embraced is because there's just not a lot of marketing. Products, it's hard to be, it's hard to package the carnivore foods in a way that they're shelf stable and like, shiny wrapped and kind of fun, right? Because they're just real foods that you find in the butcher's case. And there's not a lot of need for like gimmicky supplements. If you get your electrolytes, which is like sodium, potassium, have some liver, magnesium, you're sort of good to go. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
This episode is going to be a little bit different from other Carnivore Cast episodes. I started this podcast to support a burgeoning community of carnivores, which I'm passionate about. And I'm humbled to speak with role models, hear people's health stories, and discuss deep carnivore topics that help thousands of people on their health journeys. Along this journey, others have started businesses to improve our carnivore community, and from time to time, you'll hear from select sponsors on the show. My hope is to help them grow and to share with you what I believe are products that will add tremendous value to you and products that I've found useful. With that in mind, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor for today's show, Optimal Carnivore. A lot of people ask me about how to make liver more tasteful and how to cook it or incorporate other organ meats on carnivore. Optimal Carnivore can help you do just that with their grass-fed organ complex. It was created by carnivores for carnivores, and they start by sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand, gently freeze-drying the organs and encapsulating them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. Just 6 of these capsules a day is the same as eating an ounce of raw organ meat. I personally take these every single day, as does my wife. Even though we both eat liver and other organ meats, our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, and this unique blend has 9 different organs, including beef liver, brain, thymus, kidney, spleen, etc. And I think it's great to get a daily dose of these organs when you can. So it covers all your bases, whether you're at home or traveling. What's also cool is they plant a tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So visit www.optimalcarnivore.com/carnivorecast and use the code carnivore10 to receive 10% off your purchase. Thanks, and back to the show. I should mention on your Instagram, some of the pictures you have of those like beef fat trimmings and the way you prepare some of the organs are seriously drool worthy. So you become quite a foodie, which I really appreciate.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I appreciate you saying that you like the photos. I think maybe what you're referring to is those little ribeye niblets that I fry up, which are so delicious. So I will tell your listeners it's a great thing to do. If you can get your butcher to leave all the fat on your ribeye steaks, just say, please don't trim it, leave everything on. There's a part of the ribeye steak called the tail, which is mainly fat. And in the supermarkets, they cut it off. It's just a big white triangle at the end of the ribeye steak. So I will take that and slice it up and then fry it in cast iron, render out a little bit of the fat, and they crisp up, and it is delicious. I mean, it's kind of like beef bacon. It's just like, it's really delicious. And then I use the fat that's rendered out to fry the ribeye. And I mean, it's all the noms. It's delicious.
Yeah. I'm super jealous. You're making me hungry. And no, it's all good. And how about, I mentioned in the intro that you care a lot about regenerative. How do you source your meat?
So I am very opposed to purchasing meat that's from overseas. I sort of believe that like we should get our meat more locally. And when I say locally, I sort of just mean, but from U.S. ranchers and U.S. farmers, right? Because we're in the U.S. So I source my meat as best as I can, sort of keep the travel of my meat down. My best way is to get it from the supermarket that's close to me. And that way I am getting the meat that I like, the meat that I can afford. And there's not any extra shipping happening, and there's not a lot of extra driving happening for me to get that meat. So the bulk of what I get is really just from my local supermarket. And I have shopped at lots of different markets in my area. I mean, some really pricey butcher shops and, everything in between, like the least expensive supermarket to the expensive specialty shop. And I have found like one of my local supermarkets has the best cuts of ribeye. And so I stick with them, and I mainly buy from that supermarket. But for me to get the specialty stuff like the beef heart and the suet and some liver and stuff, I will go to a specialty shop, which is a little bit more of a drive, which I hate to do because I hate, just burning the fossil fuels, but it's a little bit more of a drive for me. But, to get those cuts, I do that. I'll go to a specialty butcher.
That's great. It sounds like you're a very conscious consumer. And have you noticed a difference in how you feel and the taste eating more grass-fed, grass-finished versus grain-finished meats over time?
Yeah, at this point, I have tried grass. I mean, I've obviously had grass-fed, grass-finished, and grain. And my favorite is grain-finished. I just prefer the taste of it, and I prefer the fattiness of it. So I find that I am far more satisfied with a grain-finished steak than a grass-finished steak because there's just not enough fat on those grass-finished steaks. I have seen, though, recently some really amazing steak. And I know you've got a source, that are grain finished and also really well marbled, which I would be, very interested in trying. But I have issue with having the meat flown to me. Like, I just feel terrible about ordering and having meat shipped. So I just still try to buy it local. And I'm sort of just working within, the system that I have. And the grass-fed that's available to me locally is just very lean. So I don't get satisfied on it. I really do love the grain finished, and I feel really good about, how that industry works. Like, I mean, we could talk about that a little bit, later, but I feel pretty good about eating meat regardless of if it is grass finished or grain finished.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I'm the same way. And I think some of the claims about sustainability and the health of grass finished grain versus grain finished is kind of overblown. And I do want to dive into that a little bit, Linda, but I just want to finish off on kind of your way of eating and your personal philosophy. How about dairy, and how much of that do you have, or do you notice any difference with it?
Yeah. So until February, which was, what are we? We're in April now. Until February of this year, I had totally included dairy, full fat dairy, cheese. It was not, like I said, it wasn't as much as I was having in the beginning, but I would include some dairy every day, just a little bit every day. And then in February, I said, you know what? Let me just try and get rid of it. At the same time, I decided, let me try and get rid of eggs at the same time and see what happened. Coincidentally, I had started and finished I think it was a 3-day fast. Normally at the end of a fast, I go back to eating my meat, eggs, cheese, and I'll gain back a certain amount of weight, which I know is just, you lose a little bit of water, you gain a little bit of water back. And I found it very interesting this time that after the fast and after not reintroducing dairy, that weight didn't come back. And I said, oh my gosh, I think I've got an issue with dairy. So I am really trying to keep it to bare minimum now. I am no longer putting heavy whipping cream in my coffee. It's been a few months without the heavy whipping cream, and it's been a few months without, cheese on a burger and stuff like that. So dairy is kind of, it's kind of gone. I think I'm going to say it's kind of gone. It is so rare now that I really don't want to include it.
Yeah, it's hard to give it up for good. But it is amazing how much better some people feel. And how about like non-carnivore cheats or treats, keto desserts, any of that? Do you include any of that, and how so?
Yeah, I do not. I mean, that's to me like a no-go. Anything that is like sweetened, like a keto, keto bars and stuff like that, absolutely not. So I won't touch any of that stuff. To me, those things are just sort of like non-food. So I won't, I'm just done with that. So there's no treats or sweets. I'll tell you a really funny story. There's one particular bar, and I don't know if I should name names, but when I was keto for a very short time, I found myself literally driving from parking lot to parking lot, trying to find a GNC that was open so I could get a box of those bars. There's something in those keto bars that is.
Is it the Quest bars, or was it something else?
Well, you said it, not me. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's something in those that really makes you crave them. And that to me is a signal that, that's not really great for you.
Yeah.
So I will not touch anything like that. So I don't do any cheats or treats that way. No.
Okay. And what do you think of people, like, just in general, your experience working with people, helping people, seeing people in the groups? What's your philosophy on kind of 100% carnivore versus 90 to 95% carnivore?
So here's my take on that. I am not a fan of anything that makes a meat-based diet inaccessible to people, because a meat-based diet is, to me, it's the healthiest diet. So if that is 90% carnivore and you're going to include a side of broccoli or a side of mushrooms, or if there is cilantro on your taco, I am not going to get mad at you. I'm not going to say you're not a true carnivore. I think when we talk about like carnivore, you kind of want to be like a 99%. And I think if you're 95% or 90%, I don't know how you would even figure out, right? The percentages. But then, maybe you don't want to say you're, carnivore the way we use it, like in social circles. You want to just say you have a meat-based, eating, victus, I guess they say.
Right.
So that you're meat based, because people will come at you and say, oh, you're not carnivore. I saw you and you ate that, you had that tomato sauce.
Sure.
And so, I think that what's most important is that people improve their health. And if you can do that with 90%, animal foods, then great. I love you. You're part of my tribe. You know what I mean? If you are 100%, even better. That's great. But, I don't get down on anybody who is going to do, 90% carnivore and then have some spinach. Like, no big deal. If you tolerate spinach well, have it. You're living your best life. That's great.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think it totally depends on the individual and what works for you. I think the vast majority of people could improve their health a lot by eating, meat-based, as you say, 90 to 95% carnivore. And if that's ever going to be a barrier for someone, I wouldn't stop them from including, a square of dark chocolate or something like that here and there. But if you have autoimmune issues, it may take you to that next level. You may have to be completely strict with 100% carnivore.
I agree with you. Right. And when people are showing like autoimmune responses like that, inflammatory markers are up and things like that. If you're having issues with oxalates, if you're having issues with your gut, then I would definitely recommend you just go to 100%, meat and consider it an elimination diet and really see what's going on there. Because if you don't get rid of that other 10% or that 5% of plant foods, you're not going to necessarily regain your health, and you're not going to get the knowledge about how to regain your health because you haven't really cut everything out. So in times like that, in situations like that, I think 100% carnivore is absolutely the way to go.
Yeah, I'm with you. And so I promised we'd get back to it. Let's talk a little bit about like the meat's effect on the environment and sourcing and things like that. And you said you feel good about the meat you're sourcing and its impact on the food system. Can you just talk a little bit about that and why you find this topic interesting? And what I love again about your Instagram, Linda, is you reel people in with the delicious meat pictures, but then you share bite-sized pieces of information on agriculture and food husbandry and nutrition guidelines and things like that.
Thank you. I try because the meat pictures really do get the people. I mean, if you just come at them sometimes with, some text, it's harder to get people to sort of listen. And I am sort of passionate about, I'm absolutely passionate about regenerative agriculture, but I'm also passionate about just animal agriculture in general being non-destructive. It is not the bad guy that everyone makes it out to be. And I don't want to say everyone, but that some people make it out to be. Our earth is not suffering because of the cows. I mean, when you look at how many cows we have now versus how many cows we used to have, or all of the bison that were on the plains, it's far less. But our environment is not doing as well as it used to be. I feel good about that. There is oversight in the USDA facilities that are overseeing the production of, the processing of meat that some people consider not okay, like all of these feedlot operations. And I just feel like they are not what some people make them out to be. The cows are very well cared for. They are not, pumped full of antibiotics, pumped full of growth hormones. They're not, using up all the water. And they're not the cows are not destroying our environment.
Yeah.
Like if people are concerned about, the methane that comes from cows and the greenhouse gas emissions that come from the agricultural industry, and if you look at the percentages there, the whole livestock industry in the U.S. is responsible for 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. And then 80% of greenhouse gas emissions is coming from things like transportation, the production of electricity, concrete production, construction industry, stuff like that. So to say that the way to solve the issue of greenhouse gas emissions is to get rid of the CAFOs, I just am not buying into it. And I think what is such a shame is that there's, there are carnivores among us that will sort of side with that because they feel like they'll side with, eating meat is good as long as it's all great, grass finished.
Yeah.
And I'm like, let's not draw that line. I think we should stop that sentence that eating meat is good.
Yeah.
Because to say that 4%, if you want to split that into what exactly does the livestock category represent, it's 2%. So that's beef. I'm sorry, that's beef. Beef is only 2%. So to say that switching to all grass finished beef is how we're going to save the planet is like, come on, that's not it. That's not where we are. And let's not start a fight where there doesn't need to be one. Basically that's my stance on it.
Yeah. I am very close to your stance as well. I think more meat is good for the environment, and cows that are finished on grain are still helping the environment in sequestering carbon and not monocropping and destroying our topsoil as much through something like agriculture. And the average plant-based person is shipping ingredients from all over the world, having to store them, having to process them, maintain them, get them to the grocery store. Most of them spoil. It's just a completely different effect on our environment and entire food ecosystem.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much destruction in agriculture. So if you say that the only way to save the planet is to stop eating meat, then your alternative is to start eating more plants. And then that requires more tillage, more monocropping, more destruction of ecosystems. And, people talk about, but you're killing the animals, the whole vegan story. And people really that state that are not being true about how many animals are killed for plant agriculture. I mean, entire ecosystems go dark because of monocropping. And topsoil just blows away because of monocropping. And that doesn't happen, like you were saying, that doesn't happen with raising cattle. Even when those cattle are finished for the last 4 months of their lives, when those cattle are finished on grain, they've still got, somewhere between 10 and 12 months where they're not on the feedlot, where they are out, in a pasture being raised in these family run, cow calf operations, or, the stalker, farms and stuff like that, where they are contributing to carbon sequestration and the building of topsoil. And so, flying vegetables in, using the fossil fuels, burning the fossil fuels, that's where the damage comes. Like acai berries, goji berries, avocados, like the amount of water it takes to grow an almond tree, things like that. I think it's just very destructive, and people turn a blind eye to it. And claim that all will be saved if we just stop eating meat. And it's just not true.
Yeah. It's crazy how much it is in the mainstream narrative, which is kind of concerning and scary.
It is very concerning.
And shifting topics a little bit, Linda, what does your family, your kids, and the rest of your family think of carnivore, and what do they eat?
So I have 2 kids, and they eat generally a pretty standard. You know what? I'll say this. They had been eating a very standard American diet, but recently my daughter has decided that she wants to do keto.
Ooh.
So I know I am like over the moon about this. It only took 5 years. It only took 5 years. So she's doing very well with it, and she's enjoying that. She's switched to keto, and so I'm helping her, figure out foods that she can eat. And she sees me, every day. She's seen me just eating meat. But in the past, typically she'll just roll her eyes and just be like, whatever. She's sort of accepting of it. My son eats pretty right now. He's still kind of standard American. I try and keep the family meals low carb. Like I'll try and get him to skip the bun on his hot dog and skip the bun on his hamburger and stuff like that. But he definitely eats more like what I would consider junk food than I would like. Okay. I find it very hard to do the food argument all the time. I think now that everyone is spending more time together and at home, it's going to be easier for me to control the food because he's not going to be going to school and seeing what his friends are eating, and we won't be having that daily argument. So I'm hoping that things will shift a little bit. But my husband eats more or less carnivore plus salad because he's sort of a volume eater. So he likes to have the meat, and then he likes to have a huge salad, either before or after the meat. So we'll do that. So they think what I do is just kind of what I do. My son's completely used to it. I don't think he remembers anything else. I just eat meat. That's what I do.
Yeah, that's great. That's it's so important to have supportive loved ones, especially on this way of eating where you don't always have people in person you can point to or eating the exact same way as you. I'm fortunate that my wife is carnivore as well, and it's really a delight cooking together and eating together. We both just kind of rave to each other all the time about how good we feel. So that's very reassuring.
That's awesome. I mean, it's so great. It's so important. I was just thinking about this recently because if people don't have that kind of really close support, like close enough that in-person support where they're in the supermarket or they're at the family dinner table and they have to make an on-the-spot choice of, am I going to pick up that, side of mac and cheese, or am I going to order the fries with my burger? And your partner across the table or the rest of your family is kind of egging you on to just live a little. It is so hard to get into that carnivore groove if you don't have the right support. It is just so much easier to do what everyone else at the table is doing. So it does take a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? It takes just a lot of strength to stand up to the advertising that we're bombarded with and the convenience of the foods that we're bombarded with, and make the choices, and having people around you that will say, you don't want that. That's not good for you. You know that. You just told me that last time. You weren't going to do that. You weren't going to eat that. Come on, let's go get this other thing instead, or let's just go for a walk instead. It is so important to have that kind of support. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And talking about that, social situations, how do you handle them when you're out with people? Do you find it difficult to follow this diet? You're a veteran here, so I'm sure you have some tips.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I was very shy about it. I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't tell even my best friends that I was doing this. I think I didn't tell my family other than my husband. Like I said, well, if I discuss this, with my daughter's going to go tell her friends, and they're going to talk to their parents, and everyone's going to think I'm like a crazy person. So I really didn't tell anybody. And in social situations, I would just kind of take the sandwich and eat the meat out of the sandwich kind of a thing. Or obviously if I were in a restaurant, I would just order the steak and leave the vegetables on the plate. Nobody's going to think anything of it. So those are some tips. If you are in social situations where you really don't want to share with your company, or you don't feel comfortable sharing that you're doing carnivore with your company, after this amount of time, I'm more comfortable with it. I've told more people about it. And so, my social circles are sort of familiar with my just ordering the meat and not ordering any sides. And they don't look at me funny because they know that this is just what I do. But I think for most people in social situations where you don't know exactly who, like social-wise, you don't know who you're encountering. Like you may be ordering a big steak and you're sitting across from someone who's a vegetarian, and then they'll question you about it. You certainly don't want to get into the argument at the dinner table with a colleague about how their diet is destroying the planet and your diet is not destroying the planet, stuff like that. So in social situations like that, I just, recommend that people just kind of nod and smile and change the subject and not get into it, because there's a time and place for conversation like that. I think you can say to people, I feel great. I feel great just eating this. I'm totally fine. I don't feel like I need to decide. No, I'm good. And then just leave it at that. People who are curious about it and not just trying to slam you and say what you're doing is wrong will probably most likely want to talk to you about it later.
Yeah.
And you can get you in like a little side conversation where it's not as awkward and say like, hey, why are you doing this? And are you really feeling better? Or like, I noticed you're like looking a lot better, or you're losing weight. Like, how are you doing that? And are you sure meat's not killing the planet? Because I watched this Netflix documentary that told me that it was, and stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't generally share with everybody because you never know who's in the room. And to start talking about carnivore, when you really don't have a good read on the room, you don't really know who's going to get offended.
Yeah. I really like that approach of just being the living example and letting people come to you. I think it's so much more effective, and I've learned that the hard way, and banged my head against the wall a few times. But, it's nice when people come up to you at work or in the gym or something like that and say, hey, what's your diet look like, or how are you doing that? And you say, well, I eat a lot of meat. I don't eat many carbs. And they're like, oh, interesting. And then they're like, so what will you have for lunch? Things like that. And you just kind of give them bite-sized pieces when they're ready. That's been my approach, and that's what I found to work.
I love that. Yep, that's it. I mean, that's great. People will be interested and they'll ask, and then you can answer. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And how's the diet affected your dancing, Linda? Because I know you said you had been dancing before starting carnivore.
Yeah. I mean, there have been huge improvements in my dancing. I mean, granted, I have been dancing for 5 more years than I was before I was 5 years carnivore. So I have 5 more years experience. But additionally, I feel like I am a much better dancer as a carnivore than as a standard low carb person. I have so much more energy. I am not in that daily pain that I was in, and I'm not in that roller coaster of anxiety and depression that I was in that would sometimes cause me to cancel my lessons. So I show up every time. I mean, for the last 5 years, I've been showing up every time I have a lesson. I don't have the social anxiety anymore that would keep me from doing competitions or doing, social events with the rest of the dance studio. So mentally, there's been a shift for me for dancing. I don't have that pre-competition anxiety anymore. And I'm far more willing to sign up for stuff. But physically, there is something about being completely fat adapted that is incredible for, athletic endurance kind of events. So when I do competition and when I'm dancing for a long time and my sessions will go, an hour and a half, you just don't hit the wall. You don't feel like, and I typically train fasted. So I will go, I'll wake up in the morning, I'll have some coffee, I'll go to the studio, and do an hour and a half of training, and I won't have eaten, since dinner the night before. And I feel great. I am not hungry. I'm not sluggish. I have energy to spare, and I can just keep going. You never hit the wall when you're a fat adapted athlete. And I mean, you can talk to some amazing distance runners who will attest to the same thing. You just don't hit the wall. You've got access to, your almost unlimited fat stores, right? For energy.
Yeah.
So it's been really great. And that's actually one of the ways that I shared carnivore with my dance instructor was really just recently. He had no idea I was doing this, but when I cut the dairy, he said, Linda, what are you doing? And I said, well, I only eat meat. And he was like, wait a minute. I know you, because I had told him a while ago. He said, wait, you were serious about that? Like, you were serious? You only eat meat? Like, really? But you also eat vegetables, right? And I said, no, it's been about 5 years. I don't eat any vegetables. He's like, I thought you were kidding. And I said, no, no. And so, but he noticed, that I was slimming down. I was getting ready for a competition. It's been really great. And I have to brag on myself. I did very well in this last competition. It was great. It was a great day.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I remember following it on Instagram, but remind us, did you win that competition?
I did.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
It was really great. There was a lot of competition. I mean, just to give you a short synopsis, there was a lot of competition. It was the first big, it was, so basically you dance in divisions, and it was the first time that there were so many competitors in my category, which is based on age and level. And so there were, a dozen couples, and I won out of all of those. So it was great. It felt really good. I felt like I had trained really hard, and it was worth getting rid of the dairy and the eggs.
Yeah.
And it was just such a great day to feel that great dancing. I mean, it really is a far cry from my beginning days of dancing where I would get exhausted. And you can see it in the other competitors. You can see that towards the end of the rounds, they are exhausted. They are huffing and puffing, and they are getting that lactic acid buildup, I guess, where you just start to feel like exhausted. And I don't get that. I never get that feeling anymore. And so it is just so easy to maintain composure and keep smiling, keep powering through. And, and the scores reflect that. So I recommend it. I mean, if you're a competitive athlete, carnivore is an awesome secret weapon.
Yeah, totally. It's amazing to me how many sports people are excelling with a carnivore diet or even a meat-based diet. It seems like there isn't really a sport where it doesn't help. The only exception maybe is really glycolytic, like intermittent sprinting type sports like soccer or rugby. It seems a little less prevalent, but even then I think there were some of the like All Blacks from the New Zealand rugby team, Sean Baker said we're using it. But people who are extreme strength athletes, bodybuilders, runners, endurance athletes, dancers, fighters, everyone seems to be doing well with a lot of meat and a lot of high quality nutrition.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I just love it. And it just goes to show you that all of the bogus claims, about plant-based eating. And we can see right through that because you see those people just breaking, and you don't see carnivores breaking. You just don't see it.
And Linda, you share, like I said, I'm going to link to it in the show notes, your amazing food pictures and your recipes on Instagram. But what are some of your favorite cuts and recipes to make yourself?
So ribeye is my favorite, my absolute favorite, of course, and I eat that most. But nice. I'm a huge fan of oxtail. So I try to make that a lot. And I am a fan of like beef ribs, short ribs. Oh my gosh, so good. So that's some stuff that I love to make. And I mean, really, people should check out the pork belly. There's a place by me that sells this. It's called Hive Cut, and it's basically like a piece of pork belly that's cut into a lattice where you can take pork belly and stretch it. And it looks like like the metal lath that goes behind plaster when you make a plaster wall. So
Yep.
it's like stretched like that. And so it basically increases surface area, which increases the ability for that pork belly to crisp up in your oven. And so when I stick that pork belly in the oven, the Hive Cut pork belly, it makes the most phenomenally crispy, delicious pork belly. It photographs beautifully, but it tastes amazing. So that is an absolute favorite cut. And if you can find pork belly with the skin on, check out my feed. I just did a skin on pork belly with a salt crust. And you take the salt crust off halfway through the cooking process. And what you're left with is this incredible crunch on that skin that is just I mean, it's amazing. So this juicy pork belly with a crispy crust on the outside from the skin, that is like another one of my huge favorites.
Yeah.
I mean,
those pictures are really good. I haven't made pork belly much before, but I have to try some of that.
Yeah, you got to try them. But still my most like the happiest I get when I'm eating is when I am staring at a nicely browned, rare ribeye. I mean, that to me, like you get that perfect crust on your ribeye and it is just sizzling. It is delicious. That makes me the happiest. I could eat that every day.
That's great. And how about, Linda, nutrition guidelines? We went back and forth a little bit on this over Instagram, but can you just talk a little bit about why they're so important and why you're passionate about them?
Yeah. So the nutrition guidelines that are set up in the U.S. are set up by the Department of Health and Human Services and the USDA, right? Their goals in having nutritional guidelines is to keep people in good health, right? Prevent chronic disease, keep people at a good weight. And so they issue these guidelines to try and keep America healthy. These guidelines have not worked out for us. I mean, you can see right at the start when these guidelines started in the 80s, you can see the line of obesity just increasing. You can see the line of rates of heart disease increasing, rates of cancer increasing. So these guidelines have certainly not helped, and I would argue that they have actually hurt the U.S. population because we were doing far better when we were not trying to follow a food pyramid or a food plate or any other iteration of kind of the same thing. The food guidelines are so prevalent in everything. They are so important because they're so prevalent in everything. And any recommendation that you are given as far as what to eat to get healthy, whether you get that recommendation from a doctor, a nutritionist, a dietitian, any health professional, they have to stick to the guidelines. They're not really allowed to tell you to do anything that's too far outside of the guidelines. So all of the nutritional advice that we are given, all of this talk that we hear from our doctors about, how to eat more whole grains for heart health and, how many fruits a day we should be eating and how many bowls of cereal a day we should be eating and how much fiber we should be eating. It all comes from these nutritional guidelines. So if we hope to shift the health of Americans, we have to start with the policy. And that is basically we have to change the nutrition guidelines. We get a shot at this every 5 years. They update their guidelines. And what the Department of, Health, what the USDA is supposed to do is look at the latest research. And they are supposed to take all the good science and put it into the guidelines that are going to keep us healthy. But they've really fallen short in looking at all the good science. And they just are now finalizing the nutritional guidelines for 2020. And I was so sad to see that a lot of what I would consider really good studies are not being considered in their process for determining the guidelines. And a lot of exclusion in what they will include for consideration. There's a lot of cherry picking of studies. So we are going to be left with what I think is basically just more of the same. Eating a lot of whole grains and a recommendation for low fat and low saturated fat and stuff like that, which is just not great for kids. One thing to remember is that the guidelines, they dictate government programs, right? So things like school lunch program are
prisons.
effective. Prisons, like SNAP, like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and things like WIC. It's all informed by the guidelines. So if we can't get the guidelines right, then we're sort of inflicting those really bad ideas on our most vulnerable populations, to say to people like, you've really gotta, you've got to manage your budget and you've got to buy the foods that are good for you. So make sure that you get lots of cereal, because it's going to keep you healthy. It breaks my heart.
You can't just say the guidelines don't matter, no one follows them, because there are so many people that are forced to follow them.
Right. Exactly. It's really sad. I mean, even like you were saying, prisons, and it's also like elder care facilities and stuff like that. People just are not getting the right nutrition because
hospitals.
Right. Hospital. And one of the main tenets of the guidelines is low fat. And I mean, if you start giving hospital patients, like, to think of what a healthy breakfast is according to the guidelines, it's like, plain cornflakes and skim milk. That's what they give pigs to make them fat. Like, that's not good for anybody to have skim milk and cornflakes. So it's a sort of a sad situation, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to get resolved or changed, but there are some really amazing people like the Nutrition Coalition who is working really hard to get these guidelines changed. And I hope that with some new studies that are coming out, some studies that are going on, one that's just started about carnivores, and we're trying to get a bunch of people together to do a study on how carnivore nutrition affects people, that people will start to shift away from the nutrition guidelines, and policy will follow based on what people are, seeing is as truth. But it is so hard to change policy once it's been in place. And the USDA, it's the Department of Agriculture. I mean, there's such a conflict of interest there because their main job is to promote agricultural commodities. I mean, how can they say it's bad to eat potatoes? I mean, that's like literally their bread and butter is potatoes and corn, and soy. And these are the people that they represent. So how can they back away from that? It's just a very complex system to change now that we're in it.
Yeah. And I'm a huge fan of the work Nina Teicholz is doing with the Nutrition Coalition. I'm personally I make my biggest donations there because I think that work is so crucial. And I think the way they're approaching it is really smart. Linda, it's been amazing having you on today. I really appreciate it. And I think folks will love this conversation. Before you leave, can you talk a little bit about what your goals going forward with Carnivore are and with the information you share on Instagram or elsewhere?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate you inviting me on. I just have really loved talking to you, and I'd love to do this again if ever you're around. But my goals, of course, going forward, I think I'm going to try to do a lot of the same. I want to try to get people motivated. Through social media, I spend as much time as I can. Like I said, I've got 2 kids at home, and things are a little bit tense right now because of our situation in April. But
sure.
But I hope that I can just sort of be a source of motivation for people to know that a carnivore way of eating is good for you. It's good for you. It's good for the planet, and sort of that's it. Period. I I like to be in a position where I can motivate people and make them feel comfortable doing or trying a way of eating that has been, that people have told them is unsafe or crazy or unsustainable. I want to get the information out there, and I hope to motivate some people to help shift policy. Because if you can complain all you want on social media, and you can talk amongst yourselves and in your bubble. But if that message isn't going out to the lawmakers and the policymakers, then nothing's going to change. So I really am going to try to encourage people, like I have been, to get involved in those nutrition guidelines meetings, get involved in encouraging your, local lawmakers to support your U.S. farmers and ranchers and give them the support that they need to run their ranches and run their farms in a sustainable way. All of the things that our farmers do is based on policy. So there's a lot of things that we can do that could help push carnivore as like a great way of living, of staying healthy, of being sustainable. And so I just hope to give that information to people and let them know that it's okay and it's safe, and you should, do your best to try and vote your values. When it comes down to it, talk to the people that matter. And if you feel strongly about changing what's in your kid's lunch, don't just complain to your neighbor about it. Complain to your school board about it, or get involved in those guidelines. And if you feel strongly about, regenerative agriculture, and you feel strong about that you want to support the farmer, go and shop at that local farmer, because it's important. So I think that there's a lot of information just out there that it gets very confusing to people, and they just throw their hands up and they say, well, this just so much, like there's so much confusion about, do I fast? Do I eat grass finished, grain finished? And I'm hoping that I can give some clarity to people and say, no matter what you do, if you can be meat based and if you can get your health back, you can work on all those little things later. But let's all try and come together and at least agree that eating meat is good for us and good for the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a phenomenal message, and I think you are inspiring people in that way, Linda. So I really appreciate the work you're doing, and I'll link to all of that on carnivorecast.com and in the show notes. And thanks again for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
You too. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CarnivoreCast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.